of the UU as of 1968. 1961. The original principles of the Unitarian Universalist Association, as approved by when the Unitarian and Universalist denominations consolidated in 1961. In accordance with these corporate purposes, the members of the Unitarian Universalist Association, dedicated to the principles of a free faith, unite in seeking, 1, to strengthen one another in the free and disciplined search for truth as the foundation of our religious fellowship. 2, to cherish and spread the universal truths taught by the great prophets and teachers of humanity in every age and tradition, immemorially summarized in the Judeo-Christian heritage as love to God and love to man. 3, to affirm, defend, and promote the supreme worth of every human personality, the dignity of man, and the use of the democratic method in human relationships. 4, to implement our vision of one world by striving for a world community founded on ideals of brotherhood, justice, and peace. 5, to serve the needs of member churches and fellowships, to organize new churches and fellowships, and to extend and strengthen liberal religion. 6, to encourage cooperation with men of goodwill in every land. Catherine Vance is a candidate for UU ministry serving the, I'm sorry, my brain's not working. Catherine Vance is a candidate for UU ministry serving her internship here with us. She is enrolled in the Master of Divinity program at Iliff School of Theology. She's also a chaplain at UTMB Hospital in Clear Lake. She holds a Master of Fine Arts from Washington University in St. Louis. Her novel, The Mountains Under Her Feet, was published in 2023. Please welcome Catherine Vance.
Well, thank you for the music and thank you for the reading. I'd like to begin with a prayer or a reflection. You can call it as you name it as you will. But this is Words for Discernment by the Reverend Liz Weber. Spirit of life, we have important things to evaluate. We have wrestled with choices, sought advice, weighed our options. We are giving this good time, heart, and thought. We come here today with the intention of greater discernment. May we listen for new feelings and insights. Help us to be open to our inner wisdom, to new ways of knowing, to surprises, to what we have known but not yet accepted. May the path ahead be gentle and kind to all, and may we remember that this is our decision. May our truest choice be uncovered, and may this time of discernment bring clarity and a way forward. Amen, and blessed be. So as you know, the topic for today's sermon is the new Article 2 of the Unitarian Universalist bylaws. But for those of you who are relatively new to us, either to the congregation or to Unitarian Universalism, I'll just summarize that there had been a controversy going on for the past several years over plans to revise the part of the UUA bylaws that contains the 7 principles and the 6 sources of Unitarian Universalism, which are considered by many and most to be the sacred core and the statement of who we are. But this past June, the end result of this long time and very contentious process was a vote that was taken at the General Assembly, which resulted in the reframing of our principles and purposes as a set of 6 values depicted as a rainbow of flower petals circulating around the center point of love. So you may have picked this up from outside. So this is the new replacement And this format passed by a vote of 80 to 20, but this congregation was one of those which voted against that. And so it looks like the color wheel like a rainbow, and the 6 values are justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, independence, interdependence, and generosity. Well, those words spell out an acronym. JETPIG. 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 Justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence, and generosity. So, as these new values started to become better known, little images of baby pigs with wings wearing little World War II or World War I flying ace cap and goggles have started to be springing up in congregations around the country. Well, you see the cover of your order of service. So, depending on how you feel, this may be your JETPIG, or it may be your opinion of the whole business, which is when pigs fly. When pigs fly. Because there are still longtime UUs who are upset and confused about Article 2 changes, and so instead of go values flower, go JETPIG, what they're thinking is, take away my principles, will you? When pigs fly. But these shared values are a done deal now, and the language of the bylaws has been changed. And so for some, this seemed to have happened without our knowledge and consent. And so how are we supposed to come to terms with it? I will say I have felt your pain, your sense of being hijacked. Initially, it sort of felt like a theft. It felt like a betrayal. But I've come to feel that maybe this was because there was a serious gap in communication that happened, especially for fellowships or congregations without established leadership. In my own home congregation, we had an interim minister who came for 2 years, and COVID was happening, and there was a lot on their plate. And so they never addressed Article 2. And so by the time our new settled minister arrived, the General Assembly was almost ready to vote on it. And so Article 2 and this reassessment process should not have been a surprise to any of us, but it was. And congregations like Galveston are concerned with week-to-week operations with Sunday services. And we work independently, though we're networked with UUs around the world. Well, the truth is that Article 2 was really long in the making, longer than we have really known. And it was done with input from hundreds of congregations, thousands of individual UUs, and a dedicated study commission that was chosen by General Assembly delegates. And that operated for years. And so, no, I don't feel that this was a plot from the top. This plan for this to be done periodically was established at the time of the UU merger, which we know was in 1961. And Unitarian Universalism is a living tradition. It's not a creedal faith. And so this is not the first time that our principles have been revised. But we weren't kept informed. We didn't keep ourselves informed. COVID happened and we didn't know to be looking. And when we finally became aware that this was taking place, we didn't get our heads around it very quickly. So let me give you a little more background, a little more history. So again, the UU merged, Unitarians and Universalists merged in 1961. And at that time, some bylaws were written establishing UUism not referred to as a church or a spiritual organization, but as a corporation. As a corporation. And under Massachusetts law, because our headquarters was in Boston, this corporation had to have a set of operating principles and purposes. And it was told that we were to have these reviewed every 15 years. And so Jerry just read them to you, the first set. But in the mid-70s, that review process began, and it resulted in the then new Article 2, which is the statement of principles, sources, and purposes that we are so familiar with today. And it wasn't formally approved and implemented until 1985. 1985. And so what Jerry just read to you, were you struck by anything? Did you feel that something was missing? Anything you objected to? Anything that seemed dated to you in what he read? Yes. 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 Okay. So Dan said the Judeo-Christian emphasis, and Linda said the male language. Awfully wordy. Wordy. Just a lot of words. Okay. All right. So in retrospect, do you think that it was good that a revision took place of those 1961 principles? Maybe, maybe not. But just imagine being a person living in that time and having to have what you were so familiar with in 1961 be taken away. But a living tradition, which is what we are, means not being a church directed under the auspices of some theological mandate or set of rules. And you all are right. The two big areas of change that occurred from 1961 to 1985 had to do with this language around gender and allusions to different traditions and Judeo-Christian faith. And at that time, there was a lot of male-centered language and references to God and Christian history. The main impetus for the changes that were made came mostly from the UU Women's Federation. That first wave of feminism who were not willing to have our language be patriarchal. They wanted the principles to be woman-affirming. But at that time, a lot of people just didn't get it, most notably British Unitarian Universalist women. You can imagine that, they were so familiar with those male pronouns. But the words like brotherhood and mankind and phrases like the dignity of man and men of good will that appeared in that first list. The masculine is not and should not be the default for being human. From today's perspective, we can see easily how this wording diminished women, and society has followed suit. We always have been the forerunners of these things. And a lot of the sexism has been eliminated from our language, but it wasn't easy at that time. And then the second big barrier was over whether or not to eliminate the word God and reduce the centering of Judeo-Christian faith. Because at that time, UU Christians felt that eliminating God from the principles denied the origins of Unitarian Universalism. But others felt that it was high time to recognize the pluralism of the world religions and belief, which was also one of our hallmarks. Well into the 20th century, UU Sunday schools were teaching children that we believe in, and this is a quote from that time, the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man, the leadership of Jesus, salvation through character, and the progress of mankind onward. Now, I can take all that in, and I can say that it's true in its way, or that it's metaphorical, but I'm doing a lot of translating in my head to accept that. It's cringy to me, that mixture of paternalism and a superior dominating male divinity figure. But the word God was ultimately removed, and the influence of the Judeo-Christian faith, which was and is real, was easily incorporated into our sources. And you may also notice that a seventh principle was not there. We have 7 principles now, but that was brought about by the environmental movement of the 70s and 80s, and that was added in, the interdependent web of all existence. And so it's hard to imagine that only 20 years earlier, this was not on the radar at all. So all those things change because, again, we're not a creedal faith. We don't operate by dogma and doctrine, but when those 7 principles were finally in place, they came to operate for us as a sort of creed. And we have printed them out, and we've put them on our walls, and we've explained ourselves to others by using them. And so people quickly forgot that there had been an earlier set of principles. And they also didn't think about the fact that at some point in the future we would be asked to re-examine the things that we said and believed and the way that we presented them. Reminders that it was time to start this review process again started coming up around 2005. So that long ago, 20 years ago. But the wheels turned really slowly. And so in 2020, Warren Ross, who is an editor of the UU World magazine and the author of The Premise and the Promise, which is one of the best books which describes Unitarian Universalism, he wrote that we had to be aware that there would come a time that our principles would be perceived to have inadequacies and that a rewriting was demanded, just as it had happened before. Because we are called to walk our talk of regeneration and renewal, that mixture of heart awareness and intellectual consideration for which we're so well known. But the 7 principles had become sacred, so sacred that when the idea of adding an 8th principle came up 15 years ago, people were very uncomfortable. The idea being talked about was building a diverse, multicultural community and accountably dismantling racism in ourselves and our institutions. That's a lot of words. That's a lot of words. But UUs, mostly white, mostly educated, were reluctant to turn that mirror on themselves. What, they said, what, are you going to call me a racist? The very idea. And they didn't want to mess either with that holy number 7. Even though we're scientifically oriented, there's something just magical about the number 7. Having 8 principles just didn't seem right, like having 51 states, right? For Puerto Rico, right? So it just doesn't hit psychically the right way. But there are over 200 UU congregations that did add that 8th principle. And now those same ideas of anti-racism and anti-oppression have been absorbed into these new values, this new values flower, along with the sentiments of the other 7 principles. And so that 8th principle got mingled in with the process of revising Article 2. And for many, complaints about these values refer back to this, because they felt that they were being told what they had to do, told what was right in their social justice efforts toward others. White Unitarians think of themselves as allies to people of color. And we find it hard to have that behavior called into question, to be told that there are still practices and institutions that are not welcoming, that are lacking in racial understanding, and told that we still have a lot to learn. Well, this will be a sermon for another day. But for sure, the incorporated anti-racist aspects of the values and the call to action to address racism within our denomination is one of the reasons why the approval for Article 2 turned out to be so hard. Well, I ask you to think again about those 1961 sets of principles, those sexist nuances, that bias in favor of traditional Christianity at the expense of other worldviews that was there. So it was good then for Unitarian Universalism to look deeply and hold itself accountable to level the field for women and to acknowledge that God language should not be assumed to be everybody's language. And it's good now for white Unitarians and Unitarian Universalism in general to hold itself accountable for racial justice, just as we did for women's rights and as we have done since on behalf of LGBTQ. So I'd like to ask you now, especially if this idea of accountability is one of your objections to the values, to be opening to learning things about yourself and our church culture, maybe not this particular church, but in general, that you find uncomfortable or not be able to see at this moment. Because it's not just about our self-perceptions. It's about community, and we need to listen, and we need to accept what indigenous people and people of color are telling us about what they need and what they feel and how they feel included or excluded. Because the values are designed to help us move that forward. They're not intended to indict us. They're intended to help us. So what do we do now with these principles and values? Well, we can do whatever we want. We don't have to give up the principles or even the statements to which we are so accustomed. These principles are not obsolete, but they've been absorbed language-wise and gotten more contemporary in look as well. They are the scaffolding for these values. The principles are the scaffolding for these values, just as the 1961 principles were the scaffolding for the 1985 principles. So we can keep saying those and holding them dear. And this is acknowledged at the highest levels of Unitarian Universalist leadership. Executive Vice President Kerry McDonald is someone who I've heard say that there's no reason for us to give these up. And in fact, UU polity, which is the way that our governance works, is very localized, and individual congregations decide things for themselves. But we are defined by our decisions, and we have to think whether we may end up isolating ourselves from the mainstream if we don't help ourselves to evaluate and flow with change. I think for an example of some UU Christian congregations that I know of, in which the life and teachings of Jesus Christ are still at the center of spiritual practices the way they were 100 years ago. And I visited one of these congregations in South Carolina not too long ago, because South Carolina is the Old South. And I was surprised to see Bibles in the seat backs, along with the gray hymnals, as well as fans advertising a funeral home that had pictures of Jesus, on the fans. So this was the culture of the Old South, and they needed to fit their surroundings, and they were ingrained in their Christian backgrounds, and they were not ready to make truly progressive changes. They were doing the best they could, and these were good people. But from a broader UU perspective, they had a ways to go to be more inclusive, because change is hard. Change is hard. Well, I'm old enough that when I went to college, I typed all my papers on a manual typewriter. And there was no internet, and I did all my research in a big library, and I absolutely loved to go into the stacks and search and get lost and look in those old oak card catalogs with the Dewey Decimal System. And that was just one of my happy places. And so 35 years ago, when computers replaced typewriters, I initially had a hard time getting my brain around the invisibility of what was then called the World Wide Web. And I used to make hard copies of everything because it made me anxious. I actually had anxiety in my body because I didn't want to trust that I had saved things and could bring them up from some electronic file. And I really liked the old way. Well, my mother, who is 90, has done a remarkable job of transitioning with the times. She can email and text and selfie with the best of them on her iPhone, but she refuses to get a debit card. And so recently she was shocked and appalled when she went to a store and they did not accept cash. Well, the pig has flown. So, if we continue to question the new language of Article 2 or this values flower or jet pig, which children and young adults seem to love, instead of trying to understand and self-reflect and ask what our connection is to the Unitarian Universalism is of the future, we're setting ourselves up to be viewed as people who are doing the best as they can, but basically are resisting change and are not able to change. And so that is our prerogative. And I get it, because to many jet pig seems disrespectful. And certainly it doesn't bear the dignity that our chalice does. I know. We certainly don't want to blindly accept change, but as we prepare to grow, which I hope we are, as we prepare to welcome new members, younger members, we must be aware that they will likely go to UU websites and may have attended other congregations, and they will wonder why they don't see some of the things here that they see other places. So we are in a transitional time, a liminal space, and I think it's only right that we honor that and honor the anxiety and the fear and the confusion that we have felt or are feeling still, And so I really like the approach that I saw modeled a few weeks ago, centering both a principle and one of the values at the start of worship, acknowledging the familiarity of those principles, some things that are deeply held, maybe as well as a new way of viewing things. So, change is part of life, so let us go forward together in a spirit of trust, openness, inquiry, and joy. May it be so. Thank you.